Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Aparutade sangamatassa tavara ye sodavanta bamunjantu satang. So just to inform the Sangha and the lay people present, tomorrow is a traditional celebration for the late King Bhumibol Adulyadet's birthday, 5th of December. And he was born in 1927. If he's still alive, he'd be 94. And he was during my monastic time, it was during, much of it during his life. And I feel a lot of gratitude because he was a very fine being and was truly interested in Buddhism, meditation, and looking after the welfare of the Thai people as best any single person can do. So it's strange being an American where Americans always pride themselves on the fact that we don't have royalty, kings or queens, and we separated from Britain to get away from monarchies. And yet in most of my life I've lived under monarchies, either here in the UK or in Thailand. So it's a good mirror for my American cultural background, which, Americans are fascinated by kings and queens, even though they're proud that they don't have such things in their political system, social system. But this is about culture, and Thai culture is very interesting, a very refined code of ethics and behavior, very refined compared to the Western world. So sometimes, we don't understand the Thai forms of etiquette because our social etiquette is based on different principles. But in Thai society is very hierarchical structures that come down through tradition, forms, and then of course we find ourselves with this particular tradition, Theravada Buddhist tradition, the Thai forest tradition as it interprets the teachings of the Buddha, the Vinaya, and so forth. So tradition is something handed down from one generation to the next. And it preserves the values and conditions of past experience. Sometimes traditions are out of date, and sometimes they can adapt to modern times. And so in this tradition, we try to bring an ancient tradition into a modern European country. But the main emphasis is on Dhamma rather than on Vinaya. So Vinaya is the tradition, is the form that we are using, which we adapt as best we can to the social conditions and climate difference here in the UK. And all traditions are forms, so they're impermanent, they're anicca, dukkha, anatta. So this is just trying to emphasize the importance of forms, because that's what we tend to identify with our forms. Like the ego, the sense of a separate self, is a strong belief and identity with the physical body that one claims as one's own. And so when you're born, when a newborn baby appears, manifests into the world, it has the form of an infant human. It's conscious, just the same as we're conscious now. That consciousness isn't conditioned yet with being British or Thai or American or Theravada Buddhist or any other religion. It's completely empty, an empty reality of consciousness. And so the baby, has instinctive intelligence for survival. So it can cry when it needs attention, when it's hungry, when it's tired. But it doesn't see these as kind of personal, in a personal way that we tend to adopt these conditions of eating, sleeping, and taking care of our bodies, and our social relationships are all conditioned after we're born. So just to point to pure conscious awareness that is natural, it isn't personal, that a newborn infant has. The infant itself isn't conditioned yet by the society, by the culture, by the religion. But its consciousness is the same as ours. So this consciousness that we're experiencing now is one consciousness, universal consciousness. And then the separate forms manifest in consciousness. So the newborn infant is conditioned by, usually in most cases, the mother has the most influence in its early years. And so then the father and the brothers, sisters, family, and social identities that it acquires through conditioning, not through intention, not through any kind of intention on its own. It just takes to what's offered, and that's innocence. Innocent, like a newborn baby is innocent. So then when especially in your teens, you are no longer innocent. You start questioning. You're beginning to sexually mature and feel the forces of your body change in a way that is just natural to the male body. Female body is like this. So then we have various views about that, about what is right and wrong and proper and acceptable, unacceptable. So the conditioned realm is about what's right and wrong, what's true and false, good and bad. This is all phenomena, sankharas, that in this particular situation we begin to see in an objective way rather than in a personal way. The suffering in the First Noble Truth is about taking all this personally, seeing it always in terms of personal identity. Our feelings are personal, our memories are personal, our body is is very personal to us. And so in meditation, in bhavana, we're questioning this personality that we've acquired after we're born, when we're still innocent, before we lose our innocence. Now, a newborn baby just has the wisdom of survival, but innocence is easily corrupted. So in children, there's so many problems around raising children, and children are, the kind of in that innocent form, and just, absorb what's available to them at the time, whether it's good or bad, right or wrong. Now, the breaking through the illusions of identity with the forms, then we return, we begin to recognize, we've never lost, it's not that we've returned to anything, but we begin to realize pure consciousness before it was ever conditioned by culture, by the ego, by religion, by anything at all. So that's wisdom, the path of wisdom. When we begin to wisely reflect on the way things are, then the problems that we create about ourselves as separate individuals, our past, our hopes for the future, our identities with the conditions of the body, speech, and mind, when we begin to see these as objects in consciousness that arise and cease, then there's wisdom available to every single one of us. It's natural wisdom. It's not acquired wisdom. So the Buddhist teachings, as they've been handed down through these centuries, through tradition, our teachings pointing to pure conscious awareness in the present moment. So that's why Buddhism is something that speaks well for the modern time. People have criticized religion in general, like they're all ancient teachings, and society has changed considerably from the time of the Buddha, 2,564 years ago. It's, we have science and psychology, and the West has done a kind of marvelous, magical investigation of phenomena. So we have, as we experience in modern life here at Amaravati, the technology that is so much a part of our life these days, just flying in airplanes and so forth is, quite amazing when you think of 100 years ago this would not be available to most of us. So the modern Western society especially kind of developed this investigation into phenomena because it still believes that we are a phenomenon as a separate, independent form. So like we have these movements now, human rights movements and so forth, where emphasize the rights of individuals. And the rights are, I'm free to do what I want with my body, and I can think what I want, say what I want, because it's my life, and me and mine is very prominent in this idea of human rights. And then traditions, like the Vinaya tradition, is about duties. So we have our duties in relationship to the Vinaya structures. So the duties are one way, prescribed through the traditional Vinaya, and the rights are then, the idea of human rights is based on the individual right to be who they are, do what they want, make their own decisions, and live freely, the idea of being free to do exactly what you feel like doing. Now, in the traditional form, with the structure of Vinaya, we commit ourselves to these particular precepts intentionally. They're not forced on us. Nobody is ever forced to ordain as a monk or nun. You have to ask 3 times and go through a kind of examination. So it's not like, you're threatened if you don't ordain, you'll go to hell, or there's no kind of, I've never heard that ever propounded in Buddhist systems. So we take on this traditional form and give up our individual rights that we have as citizens of modern societies to live within a structure in order to reflect on it. Because the structure itself is impersonal. It's not about trying to develop an ego about whose Vinaya is the best. We can do that. We can be very righteous about the precepts and make value judgments about others who don't seem to live up to our high standards. But the whole point of the Vinaya is not to make you proud that you're a rule keeper or a precept follower, but to realize Dhamma as what you really are. Your real refuge is in the Dhamma. So then when you try to figure out what Dhamma is, what is Dhamma here and now? This is a Pali word. And so consciousness, is the gate to the deathless, or the gate to the door to Dhamma, to waking to ultimate reality. So you can translate Dhamma as ultimate reality. That's as good a translation as I've ever found in using the English words. And in this tradition, then we can live together as a Sangha. If this was all about human rights, I'm free to say what I want, do what I want. I am, as an individual, I have a right to a sex life, to carrying money, to be free to say whatever I feel like saying, and protesting in movements and taking political sides. These are all human rights. And for democracy and individual freedom, these are all, high-minded ideals. But this idea of me as a human body in a society proclaiming that my body is my own affair and not yours, you can't tell me what to do with it, is Sakyaditthi. That's the big delusion that prevents enlightenment. You can believe that, and then you can act accordingly, according to what you think is right and wrong. But that even right and wrong are conditioned attitudes towards behavior, towards speech, towards objects. So then, in investigating Dhamma, apparent here and now, timeless, encouraging investigation, This is we chant this in the morning, evening pujas. Santitiko akaliko ehi pasiko opanayiko budgetang vaitidapo inuhe. Then freedom then isn't about being free to do and say what we feel like doing and demanding our rights at the expense of everyone else. We actually begin to see the suffering we create by clinging to views about ourselves. It may be right views in certain contexts, but they're not absolutely right. So the Buddha's teachings are, just the basic Four Noble Truths is very excellent inheritance that we have from this tradition. So it's not about my rights, what I think, but I do have, when I assert my rights as a senior monk or, and see myself in terms of my status in the Sangha, that can be very much sakyaditi if one is not aware of it. So this is where the Vinaya is our guide, rather than just personal takes on Vinaya. Now the pure consciousness doesn't have a word, doesn't have judgment, doesn't have a vocabulary. So it's empty. It doesn't speak Pali or Sanskrit or any of those ancient languages, nor English, nor any other language. So when you begin to recognize the silence, the inner silence, that is the substratum behind all the noise of your thoughts, memories, fears, desires, that you begin to observe rather than take personally. This is what apparent here and now is. It's not something, you don't acquire it. You have it already, but the avijja, the ignorance of it, is your conditioned attachment to the forms of your own body, of your own memories, thoughts, views, opinions, cultural biases, racial biases, gender biases. All these are separate us. By identifying with all these specific conditions that are impermanent and changing, we create this sense of being threatened, fear, and we see the world as something threatening out there because we aren't in what we call our real home. We're kind of strangers in a jungle, which can be quite frightening. So fear is a result, to fear what others think, to fear making a mistake, to fear all kinds of possibilities for pain or disease or suffering. Because on the conditioned realm, fear is a kind of primal experience. There's a lot to fear. As a human form, through the media now, we get all this news about shootings of people in protest movements and and mass murders and the famines and wars going on in the Middle East, and we hear, about the deaths of hundreds, thousands of innocent people, children. They emphasize the loss of children, especially. That brings up the emotions. What all these innocent people are just the victims of a conflict, political conflict or religious conflict. What happens to them? When they die, are they just nothing important, or just, what they call it, collateral damage? That's the cold-hearted definition for the slaughter of innocent people. So in terms of political issues, there's so many threats right now of wars and conflicts everywhere in Asia and Europe, Africa. Why is that? When this ancient teaching, which is ultra-modern really, timeless teaching, has been available for so long, for at least 2,564 years, which for most of us seems like a very long time. And even countries like Thailand and Sri Lanka have endless conflicts. Buddhist countries that are culturally kind of attuned to the Buddhist teachings. Because Buddhism can be just another traditional form that we're conditioned by, rather than encouraged to investigate the reality of this moment. So formal religions, the problem with them is that they become merely traditional forms rather than means of liberation from forms. Where I assume that the basic purpose of religion and its origins is to be liberated from the limitations of forms and to realize ultimate reality. But the form, like all traditions, are words, they're forms, they're conventions. And of course they have, when you kind of appreciate religious, the ideas behind the forms and the conventions. But if you attach to a particular convention out of ignorance, then you see the other forms, the other religions, as threats, as heretical, as evil, as wrong. So this is what happens when you're attached to your thinking mind. You're always caught in this dualistic battle between right and wrong. What's allowable and what isn't, what's right and what's good and what's bad. These are all dictated to us through these traditions and forms, conventions. But in our particular tradition, it's based on samadhi, or right understanding, perfect understanding. So what is perfection, or complete, whole? Even perfection is another word. And of course it has an opposite, imperfection. But beyond perfection and imperfection, where perfection and imperfection cease, is in awareness, with no words whatsoever, but silence, peace. So pointing to this silence behind the thoughts, behind the emotions, that's the very basis of our being. It's what we really are, all of us. And that kind of perfect silence where conditions can manifest and disappear, where the phenomena arises and ceases. Where is that right now? Where is that ultimate reality at this very present moment? It's here and now, apparent here and now, timeless. So I found a saying last year, which I have notes on my desk. This open unknowingness, notice this open unknowingness is what we are, and not something we know. So trying to know consciousness is futile. You can't know consciousness, because that's what we are. You can know there's a knowing, but there's no knower, and there's nothing known. So just this word to know, conscious isn't just a void of nothingness, but it is peaceful. And it's apparent here and now. So this open unknowingness is what we are, not something we can know. Just contemplate that. We're used to using the word know about things, about colors, about conditions, about forms. We acquire knowledge as individuals. We study books, we study the media, we get degrees from universities. We can know a lot about things, about other things, about history, about science, psychology, anthropology, archaeology, all interesting things to know. But it's acquired knowledge. It's the kind of knowledge that manifests and disappears. So that kind of knowledge is about me as a human form, separate individual, knowing about history or culture, or science or psychology, about religion, about spirituality, whatever. And that's acquired knowledge. The Bhariyati Dhamma, when we read the scriptures, the suttas, that's acquired knowledge. So we become Buddhists, we study Buddhism. They even have PhD courses in Buddhism these days at universities. So we can acquire a lot of knowledge about Buddhism in general, the history of Buddhism, all very interesting things to study. Mahayana Buddhism, Vajrayana Buddhism, modern Buddhism, Buddhism and psychology. So we acquire, maybe we become very intelligent in this way by knowing a lot about everything. But the open unknowingness isn't acquired. You don't acquire that. It's not trying to dumb you down and reject knowledge. But it's where knowledge arises and ceases, comes and goes. So in this way, this open unknowingness, it's liberation, it's freedom. Even if you're illiterate, or you don't have a good memory, these are not obstructions towards enlightenment. So somebody was asking about how to deal with regret. How do we deal with regret, with guilt? And this is a common enough question, which I've addressed many times. But what is regret right now? What do you regret? When you just try to think of something you regret. And what is it right now at this moment is a memory. Some view about the past, something you said or did that you shouldn't have said or done, or you should have done better, or you weren't clever enough or good enough or sensitive enough to be able to understand the situation. And so people wallow in this regret because they feel, they're not perfect. They have lived a life making mistakes, making errors, misjudging things, blaming others for things that are unfair. And what is that at this moment is memory. You can place that in the 5 khandas of Sanya Khanda, translates as memory. So any of us, all of us, when we think of the past, there's a lot to regret. Because we learn through trial and error. We're not born into this world with wisdom to do everything well and perfect from the very beginning. We have to learn as an infant, learning how to crawl, just some basic movement, crawling on the floor, holding on to the furniture. And if the mother says, "You've got 2 legs, you can walk," it's true, the child has 2 legs, but it's not, it has to fall down before it can stand up straight. And most of what we learn is from suffering, from falling down, making a mistake, getting it wrong, saying the things we shouldn't. And that's how we learn from life. So suffering is not something to be despised or to try to get rid of, but see it as, a noble truth, that we're not going to get everything right all the time and be perfectly benevolent and kind, and our actions, speech, and so forth attain a saintly perfection. Because the conditioned realm saintliness is there, but it's a phenomena that arises and ceases. The conditioned realm is about being born, growing up, getting old, and dying. And if that's what you think you are, somebody that was born, growing up, getting old, and will die in the future, then that limits you to these kind of tight forms. You feel suffocated you feel, as you get older, your body doesn't function so well. You can resent that. Resent the fact that your vision isn't very good, or you can't hear like you used to, or you have high blood pressure, or diabetes, or some kind of disease. And as a person, as an ego, we don't want those. We don't want to get old. We don't want to get sick. Because the ideals for modern life are based on youth, on good health, happiness, not on Dhamma and the way things are. So ideals of perfect physical forms held up for men and women, that we compare ourselves with. We suffer if we see the imperfections of our own physical form. We can imagine a life of speaking always in a kind and understanding way, of being sensitive to situations and never saying something offensive to anyone, never telling a lie. This is an imagination about becoming a saint. But these forms are not saintly forms. Saints are ideals of perfection. But where these are human forms that have to learn through trial and error. So this teaching about the Four Noble Truths is about being human. You can't really teach dogs or cats, horses or cows, Four Noble Truths. Like trying to get the cats here at Amaravati to keep the precepts. They can't do it. I remember walking Jongrom many years ago out in the field, and this beloved cat that everybody loved walked across my Jongrom path and caught a bird in its mouth. And this cat had been fed by monks and nuns, cuddled and encouraged to keep the precepts. But it can't do it. Its nature is to kill birds and mice. That's part of its instinctual survival mechanism. Can't reflect on the bird wants to live as much as the cat does. We can do that. We can reflect on nature. We can reflect on a cat wants to survive and be happy. Needs food to eat, needs it, and identifies with it. It's subjected to the limitations of its form. It can't reflect on the cat form being anything other than oneself, operating from the species that it is part of. So cats act like this, dogs like that, birds fly, fish swim. That's the way it is. Humans are born, grow up, get old, and die. But humans, this word Buddha, is a kind of powerful symbol for awakened consciousness, this reflective ability. It's not intellectual. It's not about getting a PhD in Buddhist studies or studying Abhidhamma. It's about putting into practice, making these teachings so they support your awareness in the present. So what's more prominent in human experience than suffering? That's something we can all relate to. no matter who you are, no matter how fortunate, no matter how wealthy, how healthy, how perfect your form might be, how privileged you might be as an individual or gifted, suffering is the very nature of conditioned phenomena. Unsatisfactoriness, when we seek permanent satisfaction from what is basically unsatisfactory, that's suffering. Now, when I talk like this, one can take a very, pessimistic view. Well, there's got to be a meaning to life, a purpose. What is the purpose of my life? Does life for an individual human being have any meaning? And when you hear the news about collateral damage, people in Yemen just being slaughtered, children, and starvation in Afghanistan and Ethiopia and so forth is just common news. All these people, what's the meaning and purpose of their life? Just because they happen to be in the way of a bomb or a killer soldier or something like that? Is that meaningless, or is there a purpose to their life? Where we all want meaning and purpose for our lives as individuals. Because each of those individuals that were slaughtered as collateral damage must have felt some purpose for their life, as raising children, having a family, providing for family, all the usual ways that human beings identify with their duties, responsibilities, their cultural identities, their religious traditions. But meaning and purpose are ideals. Is the meaning to become enlightened, or the purpose for all of us is for us to become enlightened? Is that the purpose of human existence? So we can believe that. That's something to believe in. But in awareness, here and now, there's no purpose to it. It's beyond purpose or meaning. It's the open unknowingness, here and now. Not something we can know, because we are this knowing, this unknowingness, this peace, this silent peace that we begin to respect and understand and relax in, abide in. So I offer this as a reflection.